Hey everyone, Elizabeth here. The Last Laugh delivers stories that leave you speechless. If you're here for it, hit subscribe and let's go.
He'd spent 20 years telling everyone I'd never amount to anything. And now the owner of Pinehurst Country Club, the most exclusive private club in 3 counties, was asking for me by name. My name is James Mitchell, and for most of my life I was the family disappointment. My father, Robert Mitchell, built a successful insurance firm over 30 years. My older brother, David, joined the firm straight out of college and quickly became Dad's golden child. Together they closed million-dollar commercial policies, played golf with city councilmen, and collected memberships to every exclusive establishment within 50 miles. Me. I was the problem. James lacks ambition, Dad would tell relatives at holiday dinners. No focus. No drive. The truth was simpler. I didn't want to sell insurance. I wanted to build things. At 18, I told Dad I was skipping business school to study real estate development and urban planning. His face went purple. Real estate. He'd laughed. You're going to flip houses like some cable TV wannabe? Not flipping. Development. Large-scale projects. Mixed-use properties. That's not a career, Dad said flatly. That's a hobby for people with family money to waste. You'll join the firm, learn the business, and stop embarrassing me with these ridiculous ideas. When I refused, he cut me off completely. No tuition. No apartment. No car. Nothing. You want to throw away your future? Do it on your own dime. I was 19 years old, working 3 part-time jobs, sleeping on a friend's couch and taking night classes at the state university. My brother would drive past me at the bus stop in his new BMW and not even slow down. At family gatherings I became invisible. David closed another major account. Dad would announce at Thanksgiving, clapping my brother on the shoulder. He's being considered for the Chamber of Commerce board. When relatives asked about me, Mom would change the subject. If pressed, she'd say, James is finding himself. The translation was clear. James is failing. What they didn't know, what I never told them, was that I wasn't failing at all. I was building an empire. Quietly. Strategically. One property at a time. My real education didn't happen in classrooms. It happened in zoning meetings, city planning sessions, and late-night conversations with construction crews. While my family dined at country clubs, I was learning how cities actually worked, where development was heading, which neighborhoods were undervalued, and how to navigate the complex world of commercial real estate. At 22, I bought my first property. A rundown strip mall on the edge of town for $340,000. I'd saved every dollar from my 3 jobs, maxed out 2 credit cards, and convinced a small regional bank to take a chance on me. My family didn't even know. I renovated it over 8 months, filled it with local businesses, and sold it 18 months later for $890,000. I used that profit to buy 2 more properties. Then 4. Then 10. By 26, I had a portfolio worth $8.2 million. By 28, I was developing my first mixed-use complex, residential units above retail space in a revitalizing downtown corridor. I created an LLC with a neutral name, Highland Development Group. No personal connection. No family name. Just clean, professional growth. The development succeeded because I did something most developers didn't. I listened to communities. I built what neighborhoods actually needed. Affordable housing mixed with practical retail, green spaces, quality construction. I didn't slash budgets or cut corners. I built things that lasted. By 32, Highland Development Group owned or had ownership stakes in 47 properties across 5 counties. Strip malls, apartment complexes, office buildings, mixed-use developments. And I'd done it all while my family thought I was scraping by. I drove a 10-year-old Honda. I wore clothes from outlet stores. I lived in a modest 2-bedroom condo in a neighborhood my father would call transitional. The facade was intentional. I wasn't hiding my success out of spite. I was protecting it. My family had a pattern they took. They leveraged. They used connections and relationships for their own advancement. I didn't want them anywhere near what I'd built. Pinehurst Country Club was my father's temple. He'd been a member for 19 years. Every major business deal, every important connection, every social ladder rung he'd climbed, it all happened within those gates. The club sat on 240 acres of pristine land, 2 championship golf courses, tennis courts, an Olympic-sized pool, a 5-star restaurant, and a clubhouse that looked like a European manor. Membership was invitation only. The initiation fee was $150,000, with annual dues running another $40,000. The waiting list was supposedly 7 years long. Dad loved reminding people he was a member. "We're hosting a small gathering at Pinehurst," he'd mention casually to clients, watching their faces light up with envy. My brother David had been sponsored for membership 3 years ago. Now they played golf together every Saturday, closing deals on the back nine. I'd never set foot on the property. Not that I was invited. 2 years ago, Dad hosted his 60th birthday party at Pinehurst. The invitation list included 200 guests, business associates, family, friends, distant relatives. My name wasn't on it. When my aunt asked if I'd be attending, Mom had said, "James isn't really a country club person. Last year David got married there." The ceremony was on the 18th hole at sunset, with a reception in the grand ballroom. I learned about it from photos on social media. What my family didn't know, what no one knew, was that I'd been watching Pinehurst Country Club very carefully for 3 years. Not as a guest. As an investor. Pinehurst Country Club was privately held by a consortium of 12 investors. The majority owner was a man named Richard Pemberton. Old money, third-generation wealth, sharp business mind. 3 years ago, I'd read in a business journal that Pemberton was quietly looking to diversify his holdings. He wasn't selling Pinehurst, but he was open to bringing in strategic partners who understood luxury hospitality and long-term value. I reached out through my LLC. We met for coffee. I was 30 years old, wearing a suit I'd bought on sale. He was 67 in custom tailoring that probably cost more than my car. I didn't waste his time with small talk. "I've studied your property for 2 years, I told him. "Your membership model is sound, but you're sitting on 240 acres of prime real estate with massive expansion potential. You could add a boutique hotel, a spa, conference facilities, all without compromising the exclusivity members pay for." He'd raised an eyebrow. "And you have the capital to help fund this vision?" "I have $8.2 million in liquid assets and a portfolio of 47 income-generating properties. I also have something more valuable. I understand how to develop luxury spaces that actually serve their communities." We talked for 3 hours. 6 months later, Highland Development Group became a minority investor in Pinehurst Country Club, 14% ownership stake for $12 million. A year after that, when another investor wanted out, I bought his 11% stake for $9.8 million. A year ago, when the original consortium wanted to cash out completely, Richard Pemberton called me directly. "James, I'm restructuring ownership. I'm keeping 51%. I'd like you to take the remaining 49%. We can negotiate terms." I bought it for $43 million, financed partially through my portfolio's cash flow and partially through a strategic loan I secured in 48 hours. Total ownership, 40% of Pinehurst Country Club. Second largest shareholder after Richard Pemberton himself. I attended quarterly board meetings. I consulted on development plans. I reviewed membership applications. And I did it all anonymously through my LLC, using my middle name professionally. James R. Mitchell became J. Richard Mitchell in all Pinehurst documentation. My father had no idea that when he played golf at Pinehurst, for out of every $10 he spent came to me. My brother had no idea that when he sat in the clubhouse bar, I'd personally approved the renovation that added those leather chairs he loved. They had no idea I existed in their world. And I liked it that way. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in late September. Heavy cream cardstock. Embossed gold lettering. The Pinehurst Country Club crest at the top. "You are cordially invited to the annual Pinehurst Invitational Golf Tournament and Benefit Gala. October 14th. Black tie reception to follow." I stared at it for a long moment, then noticed the second page. It was from my mother, paperclipped to the formal invitation. "James, your father is chairing this year's tournament. It's a significant honor. The guest list includes state legislators, the mayor, several judges, and prominent business leaders from across the region. Given the nature of the event and the caliber of attendees, we think it's best if you don't attend. This isn't personal. We simply want to avoid any awkward situations or questions about family dynamics. Your father has worked very hard to build his reputation in these circles. We hope you understand. Mom. I read it twice. Then I set it down on my kitchen counter and stared out the window. Not personal. 20 years of being erased from family photos, excluded from celebrations, dismissed as the failure. And she wanted me to know it wasn't personal. My phone buzzed. Text from David. Dad's golf partners are state legislators. Gonna be a huge event. Why, Mom's worried you might show up and make things weird. Just giving you a heads up. I didn't respond. An hour later, another text. Also, some of us are getting together before the tournament at Dad's place. Family only. Actual contributing members of the family. I set my phone face down on the counter. I wasn't angry. I'd stopped being angry years ago. I was just tired. Tired of being invisible. Tired of watching them celebrate in spaces I'd helped build. Tired of the carefully constructed lie that I was the family embarrassment. I made a decision. I opened my laptop and pulled up the Pinehurst member portal. I navigated to the tournament registration page and found my father's name listed as tournament chair. Then I opened my encrypted email and sent a message to Richard Pemberton. Richard, I'll be attending the invitational on the 14th. First time visiting the club in person as an owner rather than remotely. Thought you should know. James. His response came 20 minutes later. Excellent. I'll make sure you're seated at the owner's table for the gala. We can discuss the conference center plans. Looking forward to finally introducing you properly. RP. I closed my laptop. And I said nothing to my family. October 14th arrived with clear skies and perfect golf weather. I dressed carefully. Charcoal gray suit, white shirt, understated tie. Nothing flashy. Nothing that screamed wealth. Just clean, professional, appropriate. I drove to Pinehurst in my Honda, parked in the guest lot, and walked through the main gates at exactly 2 p.m., right when the tournament was scheduled to begin. The property looked immaculate. The golf courses were pristine, the landscaping perfect. Staff members in burgundy polo shirts directed guests toward the clubhouse. I'd seen architectural plans and financial reports, but I'd never actually walked these grounds as a guest. It was beautiful, and 40% of it was mine. I checked in at the registration table. The young woman scanned the guest list, frowned slightly, then looked up with a practiced smile. I'm sorry, sir. I don't see your name on the approved guest list. Check the owner's registry, I said quietly. J. Richard Mitchell. She blinked. Type something. Her expression changed instantly. Oh, Mr. Mitchell. I apologize, I didn't realize. Please write this way. Mr. Pemberton left instructions for your arrival. She walked me past the registration area through the main clubhouse and out onto the terrace overlooking the 18th hole. That's when I saw my family. Dad stood near the first tee in a Pinehurst-branded polo, holding a microphone welcoming guests. David stood beside him, laughing with a group of men in expensive golf attire. Mom sat at a table near the terrace bar, entertaining several women I recognized as wives of local politicians. None of them saw me. I was shown to a table in the corner, not hidden but not prominent. A small placard read, "Reserved for ownership." I sat down alone and watched. The tournament proceeded smoothly. Foursomes teed off every 10 minutes. Dad worked the crowd like the politician he'd always wanted to be, shaking hands, making introductions, ensuring every important guest felt valued. David played in the third group with a state senator, a city councilman, and a prominent attorney. I watched them move down the fairway, my brother's laugh carrying across the manicured grass. A waiter appeared at my table. Can I get you anything, Mr. Mitchell? Iced tea, please. He returned 90 seconds later with a crystal glass and a small plate of hors d'oeuvres. Compliments of Mr. Pemberton. He'll join you after the tournament concludes. I nodded my thanks. For the next 3 hours I sat quietly and observed my father's world. I watched him introduce business associates to legislators. I watched David close what was clearly a deal on the 9th hole. I watched my mother hold court with women who measured their worth in jewelry and vacation homes. I watched the world they'd built without me, and I felt nothing. No anger. No jealousy. No bitterness. Just clarity. They'd made their choices. And I'd made mine. At 6 p.m., guests began migrating from the golf course to the grand ballroom for the benefit gala. The ballroom was stunning. Crystal chandeliers, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake, tables set with fine china and fresh flowers. I found my seat at the owner's table, front and center, directly beside Richard Pemberton's place setting. The placard read, J. Richard Mitchell, Highland Development Group. Guests filtered in. I saw my family enter from the opposite side of the ballroom. Dad had changed into a tuxedo. David wore a perfectly tailored suit. Mom wore an elegant navy gown. They moved through the crowd, greeting guests, laughing, performing. They still hadn't seen me. Richard Pemberton arrived at 6:20 p.m., silver-haired and distinguished in a classic black tuxedo. He spotted me immediately and smiled broadly. James. He crossed to the table and shook my hand warmly. I'm delighted you finally made the trip. Welcome to Pinehurst, officially. Thank you for arranging everything. Of course. I've told the staff you're not to be disturbed unless you request something. He glanced around the ballroom. Quite a turnout. Your father did an excellent job organizing. I followed his gaze to where Dad stood near the bar mid-conversation with the mayor. That's your father? Richard asked, noting my expression. Yes. Does he know you're here? No. Richard studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. Family can be complicated. Yes. He didn't press further. Dinner was served at 7 p.m., herb-crusted salmon, roasted vegetables, a wine pairing that probably cost more per bottle than my first car. I ate quietly, listening to Richard discuss club operations with the other board member at our table, a woman named Patricia who owned a hotel chain. Halfway through dinner, I felt eyes on me. I looked up. My brother was staring at me from across the ballroom, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. Our eyes met. His expression went from confusion to recognition to something I couldn't quite name. He leaned over and whispered something to Dad. Dad turned in his seat. He saw me. For 3 full seconds, my father stared at me sitting at the owner's table beside Richard Pemberton, wearing a suit, eating dinner like I belonged there. His face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, anger. Then he stood abruptly and started walking toward my table. Richard noticed. Friend of yours. Hi, father. Ah. Richard set down his wine glass and straightened in his chair. Dad arrived at the table with David 2 steps behind him. James. Dad's voice was tight. What are you doing here? I set down my fork calmly. Having dinner. This is a members-only event. How did you get past security? I was invited. By who? His face was reddening. This is my event. I didn't authorize your name on any guest list. Richard Pemberton cleared his throat and stood. Excuse me, Robert. His voice was polite but carried authority. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Dad turned, finally noticing the club's primary owner standing beside me. Richard. Dad's tone shifted instantly to deference. I apologize. My son, he wasn't supposed to be here. I don't know how he got in, but I'll handle this quietly. Handle what exactly? Richard asked pleasantly. Getting him to leave before anyone notices. He's not. This isn't his environment. I don't want any disruptions to your event. David stepped closer, lowering his voice. Dad's right. James doesn't understand these settings. We should remove him before there's a scene. Richard looked at me. I saw the slightest hint of amusement in his eyes. Gentlemen, Richard said, his tone still perfectly courteous, I'm afraid there's been a significant misunderstanding. Dad frowned. What kind of misunderstanding? James isn't here as a guest. The relief on Dad's face was visible. Oh, so he's working? Catering staff? No. Richard smiled. He's here as an owner. The ballroom seemed to tilt. Dad blinked. I'm sorry. James owns 40% of Pinehurst Country Club. He's our second largest shareholder and sits on our development board. He's been an investor for 3 years. My father's mouth opened. No sound came out. David's face went completely white. That's impossible, Dad finally managed. Richard raised an eyebrow. I assure you it's not. Highland Development Group, James's company, holds a significant ownership stake in this facility and several other properties in the region. We've been working together on expansion plans for 18 months. Highland Development. Dad's voice trailed off. He turned to me slowly. That's you. I nodded. But you drive a Honda. You live in that neighborhood. You can't possibly. I've built a real estate portfolio worth approximately $153 million, I said quietly. Highland Development Group owns or controls 47 income-generating properties. Pinehurst is one of them. The entire table had gone silent. Other guests were beginning to notice the commotion. David shook his head. No, that's not possible. We would have known. Someone would have told us. Why would anyone tell you? I asked. It's my company. My investments. My business. Dad grabbed the back of an empty chair. You're telling me that for the last 3 years, while you've been living like you do, you've owned part of this club? Yes. And you never said anything? You never asked. Mom appeared at Dad's elbow, her face tight with confusion. Robert, what's happening? People are staring. Richard Pemberton stepped in smoothly. I apologize for the disruption. Perhaps this conversation would be better held in private. But Dad wasn't done. Private. His voice rose slightly. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? My own son, sneaking around hiding his business dealings. I wasn't hiding, I said calmly. I was building. Quietly. Without interference. Without family support, you mean? Mom interjected. Without help from your father's connections. I didn't want your connections. David's face twisted. So what is this? Some kind of revenge fantasy? You buy into Dad's club just to humiliate him. I bought into Pinehurst because it was a sound investment with significant growth potential. The fact that Dad is a member here is coincidental. Coincidental. Dad's laugh was bitter. You expect me to believe that? Richard raised a hand. Gentlemen, please. This is hardly the venue for a family dispute. But the damage was done. Other guests were watching now. The mayor stood 20 feet away with a curious expression. A state senator had paused mid-conversation to observe. This was my father's nightmare. A public scene at his own event in front of everyone who mattered. Dad leaned closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You did this on purpose. You orchestrated this entire thing to embarrass me. No, I said quietly. You invited me to stay away from your life. So I built my own. What you're feeling right now isn't embarrassment. It's realization. Realization of what? That you were wrong about me. And that being wrong about me cost you nothing, because I didn't need you to succeed. The silence stretched. Dad's jaw worked. David stared at the floor. Mom looked around desperately as if hoping someone would restore order to the universe. Richard Pemberton spoke into the quiet. Robert, if you'll excuse us, James and I have business matters to discuss. Perhaps we can arrange a time to speak privately, all of you, when emotions aren't quite so elevated. Dad nodded stiffly. He turned without another word and walked back to his table. David followed, looking shell-shocked. Mom lingered for one more second, her eyes finding mine. James, she whispered. We didn't know. I know. If we had known. Would it have mattered? She had no answer. She followed Dad back across the ballroom. I sat back down at the owner's table. Richard resumed his seat and picked up his wine glass. Well, that was eventful. I'm sorry. Don't be. Family is complicated. And for what it's worth, you handled that with remarkable restraint. Thank you. We finished dinner in relative quiet. The benefit gala continued, but the energy had shifted. Guests who'd witnessed the exchange whispered to those who hadn't. By dessert, the entire ballroom knew that Robert Mitchell's failure son was actually a multi-millionaire property developer who owned a massive stake in the very club hosting the event. Dad left early, claiming a headache. David avoided eye contact with everyone. Mom sat frozen at their table, her gala smile replaced with visible discomfort. I stayed until the end because leaving early would have looked like retreat. Richard introduced me to a dozen people, business owners, investors, city planners. Several asked for my card. 2 invited me to lunch to discuss potential partnerships. When the event finally concluded at 10 p.m., Richard walked me to the lobby. James, I want you to know, I had no idea your family situation was so fraught. It's fine. It's not fine. But I respect how you've handled it. He shook my hand. The offer stands. If you ever want to increase your stake or explore other opportunities, my door is open. Thank you, Richard. I drove home in my Honda, the city lights blurring past. My phone buzzed continuously with texts. family members demanding explanations, cousins asking if the rumors were true, my aunt leaving a voicemail that started with, "James, honey, we need to talk about what happened." I silenced the phone and drove. On Monday morning, I received an email from my father's attorney requesting a family meeting to discuss business matters and potential collaborative opportunities. I deleted it. On Tuesday, David called 6 times. I let each call go to voicemail. The 6th message was different from the first 5. "James, look, I know I've been a terrible brother. I know that. I'm calling because, honestly, because Dad's business is struggling. Insurance market's changed. We're losing clients. And I just found out you own the property our office building is in. We got a notice about our lease renewal and the landlord's signature line said Highland Development Group. That's you, isn't it? I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking you to call me back. Please." I listened to the message 3 times. Then I called my property manager and instructed her to offer Mitchell & Associates Insurance a 5-year lease renewal at market rate. No family discount, no penalty increase. Just business. My mother sent flowers to my condo with a card that read, "We'd like to talk. When you're ready." I wasn't ready. What I was ready for was the next development project. A mixed-use complex in the downtown district that would bring affordable housing and local retail to an underserved neighborhood. I was ready to keep building. Without them. Richard Pemberton called me on a Tuesday afternoon in April. "James, I have a proposition." "I'm listening." "I'm 73 years old. I've been managing Pinehurst and my other holdings for 40 years. I'd like to start stepping back. Not entirely, but significantly. Congratulations. I'd like to offer you first right of refusal on my majority stake. 51% of Pinehurst Country Club. You'd become the primary owner. Full control." I stood up from my desk and walked to the window. "That's generous. It's business. You're the best partner I've had in 20 years. You understand hospitality, development, and long-term value. You don't make impulsive decisions. You build things that last." "How much?" He named a figure. It was substantial. It was also fair. "I'll need 2 weeks to arrange financing. Take your time. The offer stands for 60 days. We talked details for 20 more minutes, then ended the call. I stood at my window looking out over the city. I'd quietly conquered one property at a time. My phone buzzed. Text from David. "Dad's retiring. Selling the firm. I'm trying to find new work. If you hear of anything in your network, let me know." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed, "I'll keep an eye out." And I meant it. Not because I owed him anything, but because holding grudges is exhausting and I had better things to build. I bought Richard Pemberton's majority stake in Pinehurst Country Club. At 35 years old, I became the primary owner of a property my father had worshipped for 2 decades. I didn't change the membership policies. I didn't revoke anyone's access. I simply continued doing what I'd always done. Building thoughtfully, investing strategically, and staying focused on long-term value. My family and I maintain a polite distance. We see each other at occasional family gatherings, weddings, funerals, major holidays. We're civil. We're cordial. But we're not close. Some distances can't be bridged by shared last names or blood relations. My real family exists elsewhere. Business partners who believed in me, mentors who opened doors, friends who stood beside me when my own relatives wouldn't. Those are the people I build with. Those are the people who matter. And every time I walk through the gates of Pinehurst Country Club, the property I now own, I remember the invitation that told me to stay away. I remember being dismissed, excluded, erased. And I remember the look on my father's face when he realized the son he'd written off as a failure owned 40% of his most treasured sanctuary. Some people spend their lives trying to prove their worth to those who'll never see it. I stopped trying years ago. I built something better instead.